No one tells you that a single night can rearrange your entire future. Clara Whitmore was 19, sheltered but quietly curious about the world beyond overdue bills and whispered arguments about debt. When she won an invitation to the prestigious Blackwood Charity Gala, it felt like stepping into a different universe, chandeliers glittering like fallen stars, gowns sweeping across marble floors, men in tailored suits discussing millions as casually as coffee. She didn't belong there. And she knew it. Clutching her small silver purse, Clara tried to avoid attention, until she collided with the last man anyone would dare bump into. Adrian Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Holdings. Ruthless in business. Untouchable in reputation. Red wine spilled across his pristine white shirt. Conversations around them died instantly. Clara expected fury. Humiliation. Security dragging her away. Instead, Adrian looked at her, really looked at her, and something unreadable flickered in his eyes. She apologized nervously, words tumbling over each other. He surprised her by dismissing the onlookers and guiding her toward the balcony for air. Under the city lights, away from cameras and expectations, their conversation shifted from awkward to unexpectedly honest. She spoke about art and dreams she wasn't sure she deserved. He admitted quietly that power was lonelier than poverty. For a few fragile hours they were not CEO and scholarship girl. They were simply Adrian and Clara. Before dawn she slipped away, believing fairy tales dissolved with daylight. But as Clara would soon learn, some encounters are not accidents. Some are beginnings disguised as endings. And Adrian Blackwood was not a man who forgot what, or who, unsettled his carefully controlled world. What neither of them knew that night was this. The real story would begin weeks later, with a contract. 3 weeks after the gala, Clara learned that fairy tales do not end, they collect interest. The knock on their small apartment door came just after sunrise. Clara found her father, Henry Whitmore, sitting at the kitchen table with trembling hands and unopened letters scattered before him. His face looked older than she remembered. Debt. Lawsuits. Investors demanding repayment. And one name printed boldly across every document. Blackwood Holdings. Clara's heart stilled. By noon, a black luxury car stopped outside their building. The entire neighborhood watched as Adrian Blackwood stepped out, sharp suit, colder expression than the man she had met beneath the balcony lights. He did not smile. Inside their cramped living room, the air felt suffocating. Henry could barely speak. Adrian remained composed, his voice smooth but merciless as he explained the numbers. Millions owed. Deadlines passed. Legal consequences unavoidable. Unless. Clara felt it before he said it, the shift from business to proposal. A marriage contract. In exchange for settling Henry's debts and protecting him from prison, Clara would become Adrian's wife. Publicly. Legally. Immediately. No love required. No expectations beyond appearances. A strategic union to silence rumors already linking their names after the gala. Clara searched his face for the man who had confessed loneliness under the stars. She found only the CEO. This is business, he said evenly. But something in his eyes betrayed hesitation. Her father whispered apologies. Clara saw fear, real fear, in the only parent she had. And so, at 19, with shaking hands but steady resolve, Clara Whitmore agreed to marry Adrian Blackwood. Not for love. Not for luxury. But to save her father. By nightfall her life would belong to a contract. And Adrian Blackwood would become her husband. Marriage to Adrian Blackwood did not begin with romance. It began with silence. The Blackwood mansion stood tall and immaculate, more museum than home. Clara moved through its polished halls like a careful guest, not a wife. Staff greeted her respectfully, but there was distance in their eyes, as if they were waiting to see how long she would last. Adrian kept his word. He provided everything she could possibly need. A redesigned bedroom. A private art studio overlooking the gardens. New clothes delivered without her asking. But he did not provide warmth. Breakfasts were quiet. Dinners were scheduled. Conversations were brief and precise. He was never cruel, only controlled. Measured. Guarded. The man who had once spoken about loneliness under city lights now hid behind board meetings and late-night calls. Clara told herself this was what she agreed to. A contract. Nothing more. Yet she couldn't ignore the small details. Her favorite novels appearing on a shelf beside her bed. The art supplies she once mentioned arriving in rare imported sets. The piano in the corner of the grand hall, dusted and tuned. He noticed everything. He simply refused to show it. The tension finally cracked one evening when Clara asked him a simple question. Do you regret marrying me? Adrian paused. For a moment, something vulnerable surfaced, then disappeared. "This arrangement benefits us both," he replied coolly. Arrangement. The word stung more than it should have. Clara turned away, but the weight of the past weeks overwhelmed her. Tears came before she could stop them. And then something unexpected happened. Adrian crossed the distance between them. He pulled her into his arms. The hug was stiff at first, unfamiliar, protective, almost instinctive. But he didn't let go immediately. For the first time since signing the contract, Clara felt something real beneath the surface. And Adrian realized something dangerous. This marriage was no longer just business. Clara learned quickly that in the Blackwood world, silence carried more meaning than words. It was Victoria Blackwood who shattered that silence. Adrian's mother arrived unannounced one afternoon, dressed in elegance sharp enough to cut glass. Her posture was regal, her expression unreadable as she studied Clara from head to toe. "So," Victoria said smoothly, "you're the girl who married my son. Not wife. Girl." Clara greeted her politely, refusing to shrink under the scrutiny. If Victoria expected nervous stammering, she would not find it. Tea was served in porcelain cups that probably cost more than Clara's childhood bedroom. Victoria wasted no time. "You must understand something," she began. "Adrian was not always this way." Clara listened carefully. Years ago, Adrian had fallen deeply in love with a woman from an influential family. The marriage had been celebrated in headlines, powerful, strategic, admired. But behind closed doors, the woman had only wanted status. When a larger opportunity appeared, she left. Publicly. Cruelly. The scandal nearly destroyed Blackwood Holdings. Adrian rebuilt the company, and himself, brick by brick. But he rebuilt his heart differently. Cold. Untouchable. Safe. "He does not believe in love," Victoria finished calmly. "And he does not forgive betrayal." The message was clear. Clara wasn't sure whether it was a warning or a test. That evening she found Adrian alone in his office, jacket off, tie loosened. He looked tired, not ruthless, just weary. Instead of questioning him, instead of demanding affection, Clara simply placed a cup of tea beside him and said, "You don't have to fight alone all the time." He looked at her as if she had spoken a foreign language. Kindness unsettled him more than defiance ever could. And for the first time, Adrian wondered if the greatest threat to his control wasn't betrayal. It was her gentleness. Fame arrived at the mansion gates without warning. By morning, Clara's face was everywhere, splashed across gossip blogs, business columns, and social media headlines. Unknown teenager traps billionaire CEO. Gold digger marriage exposed. Blackwood's reckless mistake. Clara stared at the screen in disbelief. The narrative was cruel, deliberate, and relentless. Photos from the gala resurfaced. Old pictures from her modest neighborhood were dug up and displayed beside images of the Blackwood estate. The contrast became ammunition. She hadn't realized how loud public judgment could be until it echoed through every corner of her new life. When she attempted to leave for a quiet art supply run, reporters swarmed the front gates. Microphones were shoved forward. Cameras flashed aggressively. "Did you plan this from the start? How much did he pay your father? Are you pregnant?" The questions felt like stones thrown without mercy. Clara froze. And then the gates opened wider. Adrian stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. He did not show anger. But the authority in his posture silenced the chaos almost instantly. "My wife," he said firmly, "will not be harassed." Wife. Not arrangement. Not obligation. Wife. He positioned himself between her and the cameras, one hand resting protectively at the small of her back, steady, grounding. The headlines shifted by evening. CEO publicly defends young bride. Inside the mansion, Clara finally exhaled. "You didn't have to do that," she told him quietly. "Yes," Adrian replied, meeting her eyes. "I did." The vulnerability in that moment was unmistakable. When he pulled her into his arms later that night, the hug was different. Less hesitant. More certain. Clara realized something important. The world might see a ruthless CEO. But she was beginning to see the man who refused to let her stand alone. And Adrian was beginning to realize that protecting her felt less like duty, and more like instinct. The mansion no longer felt like a museum. It felt quieter, warmer. After the scandal, something unspoken shifted between them. Dinners were no longer scheduled obligations but shared pauses and long days. Adrian began coming home earlier. Clara stopped counting the minutes of silence. They talked. Not about contracts or press statements, but about small things. Childhood memories. Favorite seasons. The strange comfort of rainy afternoons. One evening, Clara noticed him lingering near the grand piano in the living room. His fingers brushed the polished surface but never touched the keys. "You play?" she asked gently. He hesitated. "I used to." There was history in those words. The next afternoon, while Adrian was at work, Clara asked the staff to open the piano fully. She cleaned it carefully, placed fresh sheet music on the stand, and left a small note. Some things deserve a second chance. That night, Adrian stopped mid-step when he entered the room. The piano stood waiting. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he sat down slowly and pressed a single key. The note echoed through the mansion, soft, uncertain. Clara watched quietly from the doorway as the melody gradually returned to his hands. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. It was honest. When he finished, the silence felt different, fragile but full. "You remembered," he said, his voice lower than usual. "I listen," she replied. He stood and walked toward her, emotions flickering across his usually composed face. Without words, he pulled her into his arms. This hug lingered. Not stiff. Not protective. But reluctant to end. His chin rested lightly against her hair, and for the first time, Clara felt his guard truly slip. Adrian had rebuilt his empire from betrayal. But this quiet moment at a piano, felt far more dangerous. Because it wasn't business. It was almost love. It was Daniel Reyes who changed everything. Clara hadn't expected Adrian's closest friend, and legal advisor, to become the one who unraveled the past. But one afternoon, while reviewing documents in Adrian's office, Daniel studied her thoughtfully before speaking. "You know he looked for you, right?" Clara blinked. "What?" Daniel sighed softly. "After the gala. He asked me to find you. No last name. No contact information. Just Clara. Do you know how impossible that is in a city of millions?" Her heart skipped. "He never told me," she whispered. "He wouldn't," Daniel replied. "Adrian doesn't admit when something matters." That evening, Clara waited for him in the living room. When Adrian arrived, she didn't hesitate. "Did you try to find me after the gala?" He froze. Silence stretched between them, not cold but exposed. "Yes," he admitted finally. "I did." "Why?" His jaw tightened, not in anger but restraint. "Because you were different. And that terrified me." He moved closer, eyes steady but vulnerable in a way she had never seen. "The last time I let someone matter," he continued quietly, "it nearly destroyed everything I built. When you disappeared that morning, I told myself it was better that way. Safer." Clara felt the weight of his honesty. "Our meeting wasn't nothing," she said gently. "No," he agreed. "It wasn't." The distance between them dissolved. Not dramatically. Not urgently. Just truthfully. She stepped into his arms first this time. The embrace felt like forgiveness, for misunderstandings, for fear, for pride. He held her carefully as if afraid she might vanish again. But she didn't. And for the first time since the contract was signed, neither of them felt trapped. Because what had started as obligation was revealing itself as something far more powerful. Just power always demands proof. Clara understood that the moment she overheard Victoria Blackwood's voice echoing sharply from behind the closed doors of Adrian's study. "This marriage is damaging the company," Victoria said firmly. "Investors are questioning your judgment. The board is restless. End it now before it costs you everything." Clara froze in the hallway. She hadn't meant to listen, but she couldn't walk away. Inside the room, silence followed. Then Adrian spoke. "No. It wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional. But it was final. You built this empire with discipline," Victoria pressed. "Don't let a sentimental mistake ruin it." "She is not a mistake," Adrian replied. The air shifted. Clara pressed a hand against her chest, heart pounding. "She is my wife," Adrian continued steadily. "And I will not treat her like a disposable asset to calm shareholders." There was something unbreakable in his tone. Victoria's voice softened slightly, though disapproval remained. "You're choosing emotion over legacy." "Yes," Adrian answered. Footsteps approached the door. Clara quickly stepped away, pretending she had just arrived. When Adrian emerged and saw her standing there, realization flickered in his eyes. "You heard?" It wasn't a question. She nodded. "You didn't have to fight them for me," she said quietly. He studied her for a long moment before responding. "I didn't fight them for you." Her expression faltered. "I fought them for us." The words settled between them, unfamiliar, powerful. No contract required that defense. No clause demanded loyalty. This was choice. Clara stepped closer, emotion shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Adrian didn't reply with grand declarations. He simply pulled her into his arms. And this time there was no hesitation at all. For the first time Clara felt secure, not because of wealth, not because of obligation, but because someone had chosen her. And Adrian realized something equally undeniable. Love, once feared, was no longer weakness. It was worth the sacrifice. The contract had always lived in Adrian's study. Locked, filed, untouched since the day it was signed. Clara stood in that very room now, the document resting in her hands. The paper felt lighter than she remembered, strange considering it once carried the weight of her entire future. Adrian entered quietly, loosening his cufflinks after a long meeting. He paused when he saw the file open on the desk. "Why are you reading that?" he asked, not sharply, but cautiously. Clara looked at him, calm but certain. "Because I don't want it anymore." She held up the final page, both their signatures etched in ink that once felt permanent. "This saved my father," she continued softly, "and I'll always be grateful. But I don't want to be your responsibility. Or your obligation." Adrian's expression shifted, something vulnerable surfacing beneath composure. "You were never just an obligation. Then let's stop pretending this is still a deal." Before he could respond, Clara tore the contract in half. The sound was small, but decisive. She placed the torn pages on the desk between them. "No more arrangements," she said. "If we stay married, it should be because we choose each other, not because we have to." Silence filled the room. Adrian stepped closer, his gaze steady but unguarded. "You think I defended you because of a contract?" he asked quietly. "You think I refused my mother because of business?" His voice lowered, losing its corporate precision. "I loved you from the balcony," he admitted. "I just didn't know how to admit it without losing control." Clara's breath caught. He reached for her, not cautiously this time, but firmly, pulling her into his chest. There was no stiffness left. No distance. No fear. "I don't want a contract," he murmured against her hair. "I want you." And for the first time, their marriage was no longer built on debt. It was built on choice. A year had passed since the contract was torn in two. Clara Whitmore no longer lived in fear of obligations or appearances. She had opened her own art foundation, funded discreetly by Blackwood Holdings, and finally felt the independence she had dreamed of since childhood. Adrian, once cold and untouchable, had changed too. The ruthless CEO had softened, not in weakness but in understanding. He had learned that power was hollow without someone to share it with. That evening, the city skyline glittered behind them as they arrived at a charity gala, the very kind of event that had once introduced them. But tonight was different. Tonight it was not a battlefield. Adrian took Clara's hand in his, guiding her through the crowd. Heads turned, whispers followed, but they ignored it all. When Adrian stepped onto the stage to give his speech, he did something unusual. He didn't talk about investments, mergers, or holdings. He spoke about Clara. About her courage, her kindness, her unwavering heart. He told the audience how she had taught him that strength could coexist with gentleness, that loyalty could be chosen freely, and that love could exist beyond contracts and debts. As the applause washed over them, Adrian returned to Clara's side. He smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes, warm and genuine. Then, in front of everyone, he pulled her into his arms. The embrace was neither rushed nor hesitant. It was certain. Clara rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of a man who had once been untouchable but now belonged to her. There were no contracts, no obligations, no debts, only them. Forever. And as the gala lights shimmered around them, Clara whispered, "After all this, we finally have us." Adrian held her tighter. "Always,"